Cool. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Steven.
So great
How
to
are
see your
you?
smiling face. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you for agreeing to help me explore DEI terminology because I think the language around disability in particular is evolving in an interesting way. Would you mind introducing yourself to the folks watching this video?
Sure, be happy to. So it's lovely to meet all of you who are going to be in this training. I am Emily Goodson. I'm the CEO of Culture Smart, which is a consultancy I founded a couple of years ago to focus on effectively scaling workplace culture. So I've been working in workplace culture and inclusion for 10 plus years. And then in addition to that, I have lived with a physical disability for 28 years. So the majority of my life, I had a brain injury as a child. And so the left side of my body is partially paralyzed, and I've regained a lot of mobility, but I'm very much a disability advocate. And that's something that Steven knows I've been leaning into in my work because I think there's a gap in a lot of organizations and in communities, honestly, about ability and how we understand that and how we talk about it.
I've loved bearing witness to your evolution as a disability advocate. What I'm trying to teach folks about DEI terminology is that the whole point of knowing these terms and to be able to use them correctly is to affirm people's identities and experiences. And these parts of ourselves are dynamic and multifaceted. So it's more important to understand the underlying construct than to simply just memorize the term to use.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on because I think we all have different lived experiences. And, my experience, my physical disability is so unique. I honestly have never met anyone who manifests the same way I do, whose brain injury is manifested the same way. And, I think because of that, we're probably all going to have different preferences in our language and how we want to be described. And so I think, to your point, Stephen, it does no good to memorize things because it's ever changing. And because as humans, we're multifaceted.
We have different preferences for ourselves. So
exactly.
I identify as someone who is able-bodied. That's the term that I prefer for myself.
Yep.
When it comes to my ability status, what term do you prefer for yourself, Emily? In the past few years, I've heard person with a disability the most, but I also know there's a movement from some to use disabled person to center that identity without shame. So can you share what you prefer for yourself and parts of your background or experiences or values that shape your answer?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to be fully transparent because I think it's, this is hopefully helpful vulnerability that as a person with a disability, which is the language I typically use, I didn't even know about this framework until about a year ago. And so I think, it's okay. I say that to share that it's okay if you don't know these frameworks, and that's why we're here and we're having this discussion. And it's okay if you make mistakes, because I think, one of the biggest barriers I see to having this sort of collective discussion in society is fear, and fear of saying the wrong thing. You're going to say the wrong thing at some point. I've said the wrong thing many times. We're human, we make mistakes. But yeah, just to share a little. So what Stephen's talking about is the framework currently is this idea of people first language versus identity first language. And I historically have always described myself as a person with a disability, which is people first language. If I were to say I was a disabled person, that's identity first language. And let me tell you a little bit about why I've always used person with a disability. Kind of like we were talking about a few minutes ago, identity to me is so multifaceted. And I have never wanted to be solely defined by my disability. And again, this is me and this is my personal story, and everyone's different. But, for me, I never wanted to be known as I never wanted to be defined just by my disability. To me, I have this physical struggle that I've overcome, which is magnificent, but I'm also a woman. I'm also, I like to go to baseball games. I like to, shop at thrift stores. I'm single, all of these things matter to me and are part of my work and what I talk about. And, I think for so long, we can have a whole other conversation about this, but for so long, I didn't want to be defined by my disability that I didn't talk about it at all. And I'm not saying that's healthy, but I think that's sort of how extreme I felt about this. Now, what I know about the other side of this coin, identity first language of I am a disabled person, is that people who use that language or prefer it, it's all about empowerment. It's all about taking something that was historically viewed as a deficit and turning that around, right? And that's beautiful. And I have written and am writing about how disability in our society is often thought of as unvaluable, but to me, it's been tremendously valuable in a lot of ways. So I love where that sentiment comes from.
Thank you for sharing. And
yeah,
that evolution I can think about from the identity of being queer that used to be a pejorative term, and people are kind of reclaiming that. And now it's so easy to identify as queer. Only a few years ago, differently abled seemed to be a really popular term. But now it seems that even though the disability style guides disagree on identity first or person first language, they seem to universally discourage the term differently abled. Do you know how that evolution happened? It seemed to have happened pretty quickly. Like I kind of missed it. Did someone just decide one day that we are using new terminology? How did that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to be honest, I don't have all of the answers here. I think part of it is we're getting better as a society about having these discussions about who we are and what identity is. And so I think because of that, the language is changing rapidly in a lot of areas. Something that comes to mind too, and again, this may or may not be the answer, but what's coming to mind right now is, for me, differently abled could imply right or wrong, like good or bad, right? And I'm not saying that's necessarily the sort of origin story here, but I do think if someone were to call me differently abled, I wouldn't necessarily take offense to that, but I do think language can be harmful to people sometimes. And just to give you an example, I once was working with a doctor who, so my right side is much stronger than my left side, right? And I was working with the doctor and he referred to my left leg, he referred to my right leg as my good leg. And that stung. I mean, it stung, like I felt it, in my heart. And knowing him, I knew he didn't mean any ill intent by it, but he said it, he said it meaning to say your right leg is stronger, but he said your right leg is good, which is not how I think of my body, right? It's my entire body is magnificent because of all it's done and accomplished. But, I think that brings up an interesting point too, in this sort of ever evolving language and, terminology, is when somebody says something like that to you, whether it's about your identity or whether it's about your performance or whatever it's about, and it's hurtful, to me, the question there is, for me, it's been on my journey, the question is, do I correct that? And how do I correct that? And, in that moment, he caught himself pretty quickly and apologized, and, and we moved on, which is lovely. But I think about that a lot too. So if, for instance, somebody called you differently abled and that kind of hit you the wrong way, like, is that something you correct? And I think, this all gets back to this conversation of what I mentioned of, as a society, I think we're evolving to have these more sort of critical conversations about these pieces of identity, but it's hard. Like, I've got to have the vulnerability to share why it hurt me, and the other person has to have the vulnerability to admit they made a mistake. I mean, these are, complex things.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful when you hear something that rubs you the wrong way, that you kind of sit down and unpack that and explore for yourself. Why am I feeling that way? Or if you did that to someone else, why might they be feeling that way? What can I learn from that so I can do better? Yeah. Well, why don't we end on that thought and advice? Because I think it's so perfect. And this conversation will set the stage for what's next to come in this training.
Awesome. Well, you all are in the best hands with this pro here.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, I'm excited for this group to advance their skills and awareness around DEI terminology, thanks to you, so that we can affirm the identities of our colleagues, friends, and family.
Lovely.
Thanks,
Thank
Emily.
you for having me. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.